Hi, it's me. I'm the problem. It's me. Is that a good way to intro into this episode, Monique?
God, so is a good way to intro into this episode because it's about dun dun dun
boundaries.
Bum 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 bum. Yeah, why we need them, why we have them. Yeah, yes. If you're interested in learning about boundaries and how they really probably are the cornerstone of like living your self-care life, right? Listen up.
Welcome to Heart and Soul, the podcast where we empower and inspire women to lead their best lives, harnessing the power of their hearts and souls. We are Mariah
And Monique,
your hosts and guides on this journey of self-discovery and personal growth.
In each episode, we will dive deep into topics that matter most to you, from self-love and confidence to career development, relationships, and everything in between. We believe that every woman has a unique strength and inner wisdom waiting to be unleashed.
Join us as we cover insightful heart and soul-centered topics and interview incredible women who've overcome challenges, chased their dreams, and found their true purpose. Through all of this, you will discover practical tips, strategies, and real-life stories to help you navigate life's twists and turns.
For whatever season of life you're in, this podcast is your safe space to explore, learn, grow, and possibly even laugh and cry with us. So grab your headphones, maybe your favorite drink, and we'll embark on this transformative journey together.
With heart, I'm Mariah.
And with soul, I'm Monique. Yeah, so this episode, we're going to talk about boundaries. And I think you have something that you'd like to share with us that basically summarizes why we need boundaries.
Yeah, so a little bit of context on this. We were meeting with one of our mastermind groups, and this topic came up as it does on the regular.
I feel like it's yes.
And I love that one of the group members shared, part of the hard part about setting boundaries is often worrying about the feelings of the person that maybe the boundaries are because of, or,
yes,
kind of the managing the emotions of other people. And we were talking about that, boundaries are really the kind thing.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that night, of course, because, Instagram reads my mind and listens to my thoughts, a post came across my feed that was perfect. And so I shared it with the group, and I think it's perfect for us here today.
Yes.
So the little quote is, "The givers have to set boundaries because the takers don't have any."
Oh my God.
Mic drop.
No kidding.
It was amazing when I read this, and I'm like, oh, that is exactly what we were talking about a few hours ago.
That's why we need them. That's why we need boundaries right there.
And so let's use that as our jumping off point.
Let's do it.
Yeah. And Monique, you regularly teach a course on this.
Yes.
And, it's a topic that you are well versed in. So I'm excited to just learn from you here today, but both about why we have boundaries, how to set them.
Yeah.
Take it from here.
Take the floor. Yeah. So boundaries are sort of like a property line. And I like to use this analogy because pretty much anyone can understand what a property line is, right? Mm-hmm. It's the line that delineates one building / like earth area from another.
Plot of land.
Yes, plot of land, of land from another. So ownership of one thing to ownership of another person's other thing, right?
Yeah.
So if we think about that for boundaries, it allows us to keep into your area and your space, you, and other people to keep into their space and their area, that line them. And only really through invitation should the two kind of like, we do an easement or whatever, if you're talking about property, right? Lines. So that's that invisible line that separates people's feelings, emotions, their needs, their wants, whatever, from each other. It's self-autonomy. It's autonomy. Mm-hmm. It keeps you. It's the highest form of self-care. So that's really what a boundary is. It keeps you from each other. It's the property line. Now, we don't think negatively about property lines, But some people think negatively about boundaries. Well, I'm having my boundaries. I've heard this like from family members. Well, so-and-so, they just have their boundaries, quote unquote. And so we can't call them on Tuesdays, or whatever.
Right?
The thing
Yeah,
is like,
because they're the takers and they won't respect them. So, but yes,
Right.
100%. It gets a negative connotation.
it can, yes.
A lot.
But you would never be like, well, that's their property line over there. You'd be like, well, that's their property line. You'd be respectful of that.
Well, but the reason property lines exist, like you said in the beginning, is some people wouldn't know how to be respectful of that. And
Right.
slowly but surely they would inch into their neighbor's
Right.
property with their garbage, with their spare vehicles, right?
Go there.
The scope creep will happen
Yes.
on the boundary. So,
Yes. Unless they want to mow my lawn.
yeah. I mean, it's all negotiable.
Right.
But then you could have an easement. So
Yes.
you could discuss this.
Right. I could pay 'em,
Relationship.
whatever. Right.
But we could go on all night.
Analogies all day. Yes.
But circling back, essentially, it's they are property lines exist for a reason.
Yes.
Boom. We don't have we respect that. We understand that. We don't
Why do we shame
have a
that?
negative. Why do we
Right.
shame that? Oh, beautiful.
We don't need to shame property lines.
No, they just are what they are.
Right. They're just a part of life.
So boundaries are property lines.
Mm-hmm. So that's kind of like what they are. So let's say you're going through your life and you're like, I don't know, I think I might need a boundary from something, maybe even just from yourself. I mean,
You can also have to have boundaries from
I
yourself.
think this is just a sidebar. I kind of think boundaries are pretty much for ourselves. Like we need to set them for ourselves.
It's a two-way.
Yeah, I honestly think like probably 90% of boundaries are for yourself. You just lack boundaries for yourself. So anyways, so you're thinking I need this boundary. Maybe I need to say no. This would be me, Monique, the person needs to say no. I think I write in my journal every year when I'm like making my resolutions for the next year. Learn to say no. Say no at least once a week. Don't automatically say yes. Pause before you say yes to something. My gosh, do you think I like to do all the things all the time right now?
And
Yes.
once a year, you write it
I
all
remind
down.
myself, remain in the boundary of saying no. So whatever. So you have this idea that maybe you need a boundary, right? So you're like, I need a property line. I need a property line from time or whatever the thing is. So you're like, okay, how do I even set a boundary? So first of all, you kind of have to do a little inner inquiry on yourself as to like, why do I need this boundary, or what is this boundary going to look like? I always teach when I teach this class that boundaries are 3 steps.
Okay.
So first of all, you have to identify what the boundary is going to be, and then you need to set the boundary. If you have
identifying it and setting it
is
two
kind of one
different-
step. No,
that's
step
one step.
Yep.
Identify and set.
Yes.
Okay.
So identify, I need the boundary. What should the boundary be? Okay, I'm going to set a boundary, meaning I'm going to say no once a week. That's my personal boundary with myself. Can really only talk about myself here. So
Yeah. And I think examples are good.
right. So I need to say no more often. So I'm going to use the flex of saying no more often than not. So I'm going to put out there, say no. That's a boundary for myself. Okay. So then you can have the boundary, but unless you, step 2, communicate the boundary's not going to happen. You can be like, I'm going to say I have a boundary. I'm going to just, I'm going to tell myself I have a boundary, but unless I communicate the boundary actually doesn't happen.
You have to say it out loud. You
And
have to let other people know.
Yes. Hey, look, I really feel bad that you invited me to this thing, but I have this new boundary for myself because I'm an overdoer that I need to say no. Or I only need to, maybe a better way of phrasing that is I'm only allowed to go out to one event a week because I struggle with burnout.
Okay. Sidebar. I'm going to tell you something that I told a friend recently that kind of stopped her in her tracks.
Okay, tell me.
No is a complete sentence.
Yes. Mic drop.
So
Number 3.
You don't need to justify
Right.
to the person why
So
you're
true.
not coming. Just say no. That's the kindest thing you can do. That's the boundary right there.
Yes. Yes. Say
So-
no, period.
Somewhat different topic, but listening to you say that, I couldn't help but
No.
share that because
Yes.
I was hearing her kind of a very similar story. And I'm like, let me stop you. No, can't make it.
Don't need to say why. We don't need to over explain.
No.
We don't owe people anything.
Then you're just like opening up your property lines
Right.
for negotiation.
Okay, well, let's say that this person is close to you and they're used to you doing something.
Yeah.
So communicating more than maybe no.
And I'm not saying communication isn't a thing.
No, I
For
agree
sure.
100% because let's say they're an acquaintance and then you pick up on them like, and then you're like, well, I feel this way. You don't need to. No is enough, right?
Mm-hmm.
Totally. But let's say I don't know, your husband, partner, child wants you to go out and you've made a new boundary with yourself. I'm only going out once a week.
Yeah.
And they're like, well, they don't get it because you're like going out every night of the week. They don't understand. Oh, sorry. I better back up and communicate my boundary with them. Hey, look, I'm working on this whole thing called boundaries. Blame me. I don't care. Like Monique told me I need boundaries. So I
just blame Monique.
I mean,
it
honestly,
works for me.
Right. So I'm only going to choose one day a week to go out because I'm struggling with burnout right now. I'm struggling with overdoing over all of the things. So I need to communicate to my loved ones that this is a boundary because go ahead. Sorry.
So I was just going to say, I can think of a couple of other good examples that maybe help drive this in. I mean, something so simple as I'm going to become a vegetarian and I'm no longer going to eat meat. I have a boundary. I don't want to eat meat.
Yes.
I'm not saying that I'm actually doing this.
Okay.
Worried.
I thought you were.
You were like,
looking at me and like,
what?
Wow, game changer. We're picking different restaurants now.
No, yeah. Well, I mean, I've done that in the past.
Yes.
When I was younger, and I just set a boundary and said I don't eat meat anymore. So, FYI, you can have meat. I'm not saying that's your boundary,
exactly.
But I'm going to just choose this for myself. So that would be an example. I think would be an easy one to understand. That you also have to communicate.
Yes.
But it doesn't have to be for negotiation, right?
Right. Exactly.
And then another one that I just thought of personally. One of the best boundaries I ever set for myself.
Yeah, tell me. I'm curious.
Was in my work life, I was taking meetings all hours of the day and night.
Oh, big surprise.
I know. I was taking meetings in the evenings. I was taking meetings on Saturdays and Sundays. My whole life was run amok with meetings.
Yeah.
And like sales meetings, as an example, with clients. And I was like, well, I mean, if I can't meet with them, how will I close the sale? Like, how will I...
so almost like a scarcity.
Yeah. How will I help them with what they need if like I can't be available to them morning, noon, and night, right? Like I really thought this for like a good 10 years. Again, previous episodes where we talk about burnout, that led to a lot of that.
Yeah.
So I realized that I needed to enforce some boundaries around the like when I was willing to take meetings and when I was not.
Yes.
Well, I ended up using an online scheduling tool, which was the best way for me to clearly stake out and communicate the boundaries.
Nice.
When they go to figure out when I'm available to meet.
It tells them.
Yes. And they don't question it.
Right.
Because I physically was struggling to share. Hey, can I meet with you on Saturday at 2 p.m.? And I'm like, sure. Right? Like I was. So
there's no boundary.
That boundary with myself came when I recognized I could put a barrier between myself and that conversation with an online scheduler. And then the client comes to that. They just pick from the time and it turns out
and they're fine. They understand.
I haven't sold any less.
Yes.
Because I stopped meeting on Saturdays or at 8 p.m. on a Wednesday.
Right.
Still have plenty of business. Didn't change. But guess what? Changed my life dramatically.
Right. Freed you up.
So, yeah. So I really thought about that when you were talking as a good example of like straightforward, just set it.
Yes.
But then also set boundaries with yourself too.
Yes. Agreed. And I, as I said, I really honestly do believe that boundaries are for us. Like 90%. I mean, so that said, you identified, I need this boundary, right? You set the boundary. You set the boundary by putting the software in place. And you didn't even have to, on that case, communicate because the software communicated for you.
Yeah, that
right?
was the beauty of it. It just by appointment. Well, here's my available appointment times. The rest is not important to you, you know. If they really need to meet with me outside of those times, email me. We'll figure it out.
Right, exactly. Text me if you have.
It controls 99%.
It's beautiful.
Of the traffic.
Yes.
Yep.
So boundaries, the boundaries that I kind of teach and that as I understand, very simplistic this way, but there's 3 steps.
Yes.
So first step, identify, set. Second step, communicate. Third step, enforce. Mm-hmm. And people, I think, struggle with this aspect of it because we all are like, well, we're adults. Why do I have to enforce? You know?
Because taker's going to take.
Yes, but
right?
Without that quote, I like to remind people about this whole arm of our government.
Enforcement.
Yeah. Law enforcement, because we could set the speed limit at 55, but without enforcing of the laws, people are going to drive whatever they want. We could say you can't drink and drive, but they're going to do what they want because there's no consequences for our actions. Yeah. This is why we need enforcement of boundaries. That doesn't mean you're sitting out there writing random tickets to people who stomp on your boundaries, right? I mean, sometimes
there may be cases when that could be useful.
Oh my God. Yes, but very, very important.
I love that.
I think people just don't understand it, that you can conceptualize, the taker is going to take, yes. Yeah. But bringing it home to like, oh yeah, speeders, I speed.
Speeders going to speed.
I know, right? I will speed.
But I hope no cops are listening. Of it if I know there's a speed trap ahead.
Absolutely. Yeah. You're going to drive the speed limit. So what does enforcement look like? Gently reminding people of the boundary. I like to also in my class teach that the majority of people, we know this from training from past, like when I did corporate training, they need to hear the thing 7 times.
Yep. It's not new news.
It's 7 times. Mm-hmm. And that sometimes is before it actually registers. Maybe the first time you tell them, their mind's wandering. The second time you tell them, oh, they don't really mean it. The third time, oh, they don't really mean it, do they? Oh, they're kind of getting upset. You know?
Yeah.
So 7 times. So that just gives you permission to understand why maybe people are boundary pouncers or trouncers or whatever the word is.
They just don't.
Yeah.
They're forgetting about it. Right. It's not top of mind for them. Right. It hasn't been enforced enough.
Right. Yeah, maybe they haven't been taught that enforcement is a part of boundaries. And then like people set boundaries, but they don't really mean it. I don't know.
Yeah.
But giving a little bit of grace there with the 7-time thing. So yeah, so just remembering that not everybody's good at this too. It's actually, it's not a natural thing to have to always talk about and tell people what we need.
No, we're really trained the opposite direction.
So
especially as women.
Yes. I feel like when we start like setting and communicating and enforcing boundaries, a lot of times us people who are ambitious are hard on ourselves because we're not getting it right. So a lot of grace needs to be given there. And also boundaries can be fluid. A boundary I have today for where I'm at right now might not be what I need tomorrow or in a year from now. It might not have been even in my sphere 2 years ago. So they are constantly evolving, but also not evolving out of, well, I better evolve this, more evolving of your needs, your wants, they change. So that should change.
So this is the perfect segue back to my analogy of being a vegetarian because I was a vegetarian for 15 years.
Yes.
That was my boundary. That was great. Took me a while to get people on board with it, but eventually just knew that's who I was. Mm-hmm. And then I was pregnant with twins and my babies were like, sorry, Mom.
We don't want to do this.
We want meat. We want the meat. And I needed the iron. And all of a sudden I made the change. I removed that boundary. I decided that's what I needed.
Yep.
well, it only took one time of telling my husband this for him to fully understand.
He was like
it,
all on board.
Yeah. But then it was people seeing
the
me
ripple
eat
effect.
meat and being like, what's going on?
Yeah.
But I digress. That was that's a good example for me of like
evolving,
it
changing. It needed to.
It needed to
physically
change.
Needed to change.
I did, and
you.
I could have gone back up. After I had the had the kids.
When you
or
never
whatever,
know, you might someday.
I might someday. I'm perfectly happy with that lifestyle too. But it was a good example of like it just changed. Life it is fluid. Life
is so fluid.
What mattered then may matter differently now. But you should be constantly reevaluating. Is this boundary healthy for me? Or
yes.
Have I outgrown it or need to readjust it?
I think sometimes like with boundaries, the intimidating factor is the rigidity that people experience from boundaries.
Boundaried people gets a bad connotation. It gets shamed.
Yes. So that rigidity around like, this is what I need today, maybe that'd be an easier thing, right? Like today I need to be a vegetarian. Today I need to be this, right? And I'm not saying just like change every day with the way the wind blows, but like right now I'm working on X, so I need a boundary around X. I won't always be working on X. Mm-hmm. Someday I'll be working on Y, hopefully, or Z or S or T. So right now the focus is X. We're going to have the boundary on X. And, I feel like sometimes I may have shared this before. Eckhart Tolle said something like he had been introduced to Oprah Winfrey. Mm-hmm. And someone said, oh my gosh, what was it like to meet Oprah Winfrey? Well, I only met her the one time and she's not like that now.
Because she's evolved and changed.
Exactly. So I met her that day and that's who she was. But if you ask me who she is right now, I don't know because she's different than when I met her. I think that's just like such a deep, profound, fascinating way of being so present in the moment. And boundaries, I know I'm getting off scope a little bit here, but also like they should be fluid too, because we do grow, and change and evolve. And if you're thinking like, oh, if I set this, it's going to piss so-and-so off and I'll never talk to them again. You don't always have to have that boundary.
Okay, so now I'm thinking about it kind of like a jellyfish.
Oh, I like that analogy.
You have the confines, but
like the fluid little body.
They're a little fluid. They're a little squishy, little wiggly, but
they're
they still exist.
Yes.
Like property lines. Sometimes rigidity is the only way.
Yes.
Especially if you have something really pushing that boundary.
Yeah.
You may need to really hold it.
Yes.
But on a day-to-day basis, in a healthy space, you can be a little bit more fluid. Mm-hmm. You can work within that squishy boundary.
Right.
I think it's Brené Brown that talks about like strong back, soft front. Like you can have a strong back, but a soft front. Mm. And that really gives you like the good balance around.
Right.
Like you can be strong, but you can also be a little
like
squishy.
I can be hard. I can do hard things, but I can be tender too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. Right. So,
and that's when you think about people that are boundaried that you don't have a negative connotation with, it's because they have figured out how to evolve and grow and change within boundaries and not be so rigid to the extent that nobody can get through to them or that it's outlived when it was necessary.
Yeah, and I will say it's very common when someone is setting a boundary and just really starting to dive into this boundary work that they're going to swing the pendulum far to one side.
They're going to go extreme.
I have experienced this in my personal life where someone that I have a relationship with was setting a boundary and they went extreme. And I was like, I felt like the bump. And I was like, dang, I guess I don't matter anymore. And it was like, no, and even though there was communication about this is where my boundaries are right now, it felt like hard, right? Yeah. But I have seen the soften.
Because it wasn't about you.
Right. And also
they needed to work through it.
Right. They needed to work through it. But also maybe like when they're setting and establishing them, they need to go hard for themselves.
Yep.
So they can set their line in the sand, set their boundary and know that they can do it. And then they're like, okay, I can soften a little here.
Yep.
It doesn't have to be so rigid.
So kind of like summarizing this up, I'm
Yes.
thinking about how to both be a good steward of my own personal boundaries
Mhm.
and then also to have tenderness for other people's in needing to set boundaries.
Yes.
So
Yes.
that when I see that happening in someone I love, I can respect them and
Mhm.
support them and know that they're probably not this rigid forever. You know, they're
Right.
going to, but that person will truly benefit from them. And then the other side of that is for myself, what are the current boundaries that I could tighten up a little bit?
Mhm.
What could I release a
Mhm.
little bit? But ultimately, what is really serving me in protecting my property lines?
Yes. And I would say probably the top 3 areas of which boundaries need to be set would be personal,
Yeah.
time boundaries. And you've
Mhm.
talked beautifully about
Mhm.
time in previous episodes. And then the other one is relationships. But the first 2 really revolve around us, personal and time, right?
Yeah.
So,
Oh, this topic is
Yes.
so fascinating, timely, timeless,
Mhm.
and it's just something people shouldn't be ashamed of. And
No.
that's really, at the end of the day, the most important thing is come to boundaries without shame, yours and others, and use them as a tool
Self-care, baby.
and
Yes.
as part of your self-care routine.
Yes. Yes.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
Cheers, friends. You've just finished another episode of the Heart and Soul podcast. We hope that you've enjoyed the show, and if you've loved it, we would love if you'd leave us a 5-star review on whatever platform you're listening. You can find links to leave that review in the show notes, where you'll also find other resources that we reference on our show. And if you think a friend could find value in today's episode or any future episodes, please share this episode with them on social media. This is one of the only ways the podcast can organically grow, and we just can't wait to connect with you and all of your besties. You can also find Monique and I on our many social media platforms or our websites, and we're going to leave links to those in the show notes as well. Thank you for listening. We look forward to sharing our hearts and souls with you again next time. With Heart, I'm Mariah.
And with Soul, I'm Monique.